So
Welcome back, and I hope you enjoyed the 2 sets of workshops and meeting with other delegates or relaxing during the break. We're incredibly fortunate to have with us now 2 superb speakers, Professor Vincent Wiegel and Lejla Brouwer, to lead this plenary session, Foster Talent, Lean Pedagogy, Driving Change in the Classroom. As well as being a best-selling Lean author, Professor Wiegel is founder and co-chair of the Lean and World-Class Performance Research Group at Han University of Applied Sciences. For over a decade, he has worked with the lecturer, researcher, and consultant Lejla Brouwer, who creates enduring learning spaces and work forms for those for whom she is working. As well as their teaching, the pair have transformed the way professional services are run. And they also have pioneered new courses, advised universities, and worked as advisors for a range of educational institutions. And here they are to tell us more. Welcome to you both.
What you see here is Lean in the classroom. I've asked. Yes. What you see here is Lean in the classroom. I was asked to help the group of students to learn how to improve their process using Lean. I was teaching them as a part of their bachelor course for nursing practitioners. We did all the steps we always do, thinking and principles. As you can see on the wall, we also modeled the future state and put it on the paper. We have played a Lean game to experiment the process improvement in a game setting. And all this worked very nice, but it worked even better when engagement rises. And how we did that? We brought future state you see on the paper into the classroom and brought it in live. We have experienced it, the bones. We used their new process and procedures as a learning space where we learned a lot together. Their work, their reality brought into the classroom meant an environment for all of us. And this is something we are usually not used to do. We show and tell, we practice the use of, but we rarely simulate the things we have put on paper, we have developed and modeled. Only when we bring these models into the reality and when we play with them, when we simulate, then they become more meaningful and brings us a learning much richer and valuable for all of us. And especially when there are no tangible products going through the process or coming out of the process, this is very valuable. Bring the learning closer to the learner, develop a learning space together beyond the paper and beyond the words. The learning environment we have created here was not mine, it was ours. We were actively involved and actively working and learning together on different levels. There was fun as the process was surprising us in different places that we didn't expect, and it was fun and full of energy, and we could go hours simulating and discovering. So takeaway number one: dare to experiment, create room to experiment, and let things happen.
Well, that is like hitting the tarmac running. So what we've just done, and let's take just a step back, is introduce to you, the concept of lean education. Now, before we go into that, just let's take a step back. What we did was introduce ourselves through the Padlet world map. We ask you a couple of questions, but we also show who we are. So for those that didn't have the chance yet to check out the Padlet, my name is Vincent Wiegel, and of course,
I'm Lejla Brouwer.
yes. Now, what we want to achieve for this session is introduce to you the Lean Education Framework. Introduce to you a couple of new concepts and techniques, and help you bring Lean to the classroom. So those are our 3 goals for today's session. Today, as we speak, we face a lot of challenges. COVID being one of them, the energy transition, fast digital developments. So there's a whole host of new developments that we need to relate to. And in order to do that, we need all the talent that we've got. We've got no talent to waste. So the overarching goal of the Lean Education Framework is to make most of the talent of both our students and staff working in education. Now, that framework didn't happen overnight. It's the result of dozens and dozens of experiments that we ran. We've been teaching, my home faculty is in engineering, master courses, bachelor degree courses. We've been doing vocational training for teachers, bachelor courses for nurses. We've been to the shop floor in construction industry. So we've done a lot of experimenting, testing, and trying. We published about that, and most recently in the book, Lean in the Classroom. Underlying all this thinking and framework is 2 fundamental notions. One is that pedagogy and Lean share a fundamental outlook. Now, this is important because at the very heart of education is the primary process of learning. So as Lean experts, we need to relate to pedagogy. The second one is that Lean provides the executional capability that education often lacks. I don't think I'm spilling any secrets here. Processes in education tend to be slow moving, elongated. So introducing a new course might take a couple of years. Adopting a current running course to some current events is often haphazard and burdensome. So these 2 basic premises are fundamental for the Lean Education Framework. Now, what does this framework entail? At the very heart is the notion of value. That's one that you're all familiar with. I'm not going to go into that. But there is a key second notion, and that is the notion of learner agency. And that is a concept that you might not be familiar with. It refers to a growing ownership on part of the student or the trainee in which she takes ownership over her learning displays a growing self-awareness and, most importantly, a growing self-efficacy. And by that, we mean the belief that one is able to influence the outcome in the situation in which you find ourselves. In this case, the learning. Based on these two fundamental notions, educational institutions build their own vision, why it is that they exist, what sets them apart from other schools and universities, and their pedagogical philosophy. The notion of learner agency is core to all pedagogy, but there's many different strands of pedagogy, and each school will choose which one fits their position best. Based on that, we offer the bedrock knowledge for the specific sector for which we are training or educating. The specific attitudes and skills that the students would love to have, that we think they need, and very importantly, as you will see here, various white spots. If we want to be more agile, we need allow to our programs to have white spots that we can fill on the fly. Now, that's a notion that will freak out various lecturers. We'll come to that later. Closing off the framework is what you will be very familiar with, the continuous improvement philosophy. But be careful, it's the plan, do, study, act. We're in education and research after all, and just as an observation, Deming actually liked this one better than the plan, do, check, act. So plan, do, study, act. Now, if we implement this, we create an educational institution that is able to process external inputs, say from the government, from NGOs, from R&D departments, from businesses, from tech, from sciences, and process those inputs and include them into the teaching so that we create an agile and adaptive education in which our students are the co-inventors of the future. Takeaway number 2, lean education is about learning and learner agency. Now, let's infuse this concept with 4 core lean principles. Principles that you will all be familiar with. Principle of pull, of improvement kata, of performance boards, and of the A3 thinking. I just talked about learner agency and the student taking ownership. Ownership requires room, which means that as lecturer, I need to provide a certain degree of freedom and room for the students to take that ownership over their learning. And one of the things that it implies is a freedom to configure one's learning. And like I said, this tends to freak out some lecturers because we like very well tightly scripted classes that we can teach with a fixed set of slides that we run through, but that kills the very idea of ownership. So once we create that freedom, we can use the concept of pull to implement the idea of learner agency. And how to do that, that is what you guys are all very good at and experienced in, creating pull. Once we get that going, we use the improvement kata to guide the students' learning. So we set the future state, we define the current state, we go to the next target condition, and we devise a set of experiments that will help us getting to that target condition. So this is all straight out of the lean textbooks, in this case, Jeffrey Likers on the kata. So basically what we do, and what we've done with you guys, is preset. So we set up some tasks, some exercises, some questions that will set the student's frame of mind. Then we define the goals for the teaching. And as we go along, doing the experiments and the learning, we check whether we're doing good. And once we're at the end, we do a joint landing, checking out if everyone has learned and progressed according to their ambitions. Once that's done, we progress to the next stage of the learning. This is what we call the learning space. And you've heard Lejla talk about it extensively at the beginning. So how does that relate to lean thinking? We first define the goals and success criteria. And we share that extensively with the students. So what does good look like? When are you successful in this course? Then we establish what they want to learn and what they already know or do not know. And then we provide the learning opportunities and the evidence of learning. And the last one is perhaps the most challenging. And let me be clear on that. Passing an exam is not necessarily evidence of learning. It demonstrates at least that the student is able to reproduce what we've offered, but not necessarily that there is a real deep learning. So we need other ways to establish that. And by the way, this goes just as much for your trainings you do and run in Lean as it goes for any classroom course in a master degree. The Lean techniques that we use are the A3 thinking. Now you probably are familiar with the project A3, the strategy A3, the report A3, but there is also a knowledge A3. Check it out in the Lean in the Classroom book. And it actually defines what the student knows, what she wants to learn or develop in terms of skills and attitudes, and how she's progressing. In between those, there is the performance board where we check out how the actual learning is going. So takeaway 3 from this session now is there is a close affinity between Lean thinking and pedagogy. Everything that I've talked you through is straight out of the Lean textbook and fits with most pedagogical philosophies. Now, this is all very nice and well, you might say, but how does it work out in practice? Now, we'll tell you.
You have already experienced the preset in Padlet to get to know us a little bit and to share some thoughts with us. To finish a workshop, lecture, or a presentation, we use the so-called checkout board. The main purpose is to land together with our participants or students and to take time to check out. And we take time to check out. We give each participant a moment to actively check out and reflect on the learning. This type of landing using the checkout board helps us to learn from each other and to engage more with and in our learning space. I'll just go briefly through the checkout board that we are using with our students. In the upper left corner, we have the space to check our energy level. Is my energy low or am I still okay by the end of the learning session? We believe that when having long learning sessions, the physical activity is very welcome and important. We do not only work with our mind and our brains, but we also need some physical activity to get energized, to stay energized, and to have an experience to reflect on. So in the upper right corner, we check how is our physical situation today after the learning session. Did we benefit from the physical activity or not? And the physical activity can be a simple 20 minutes walk around up to 1 hour of yoga, some jogging or fencing. Lower right corner states how we find the content of today. Are we satisfied with the content, and did we learn anything new from today's learning lesson or not? And in the left lower corner, we simply ask and check, how is your mood today, and are you connected with the group? In the middle, it's about you and your overall feeling about the learning session. We like you to put your feeling in one word or picture and share it with us. So we have made this checkout board very simple. We mostly use a flip over paper with post-its, red one for I'm not okay, and green ones for I'm okay and satisfied. In this case, you see yellow ones and blue ones. There is nothing in between. It is okay or not okay. You are satisfied or not satisfied. When you're using this in online sessions, you can use, for example, the Padlet as we did it. You can use Miro, or any other collaboration tool where you work together. While student is reflecting on the session, she's checking actually how effective the session was for her and learns more about her preferences, about her interests, learning style and needs. So reflection helps her to articulate better what makes session an effective learning space for her, and based on that, she makes an agreement with herself to change one or two things to make the next session better for her. Visualization helps me to check and ask if and what I can bring in or change to meet her expectations and needs. A simple example of how this works. A student was low in her energy after the learning session. She marks the battery corner with a sad smiley or a red post-it with her name on it. While we are checking out, my questions to her will be, what is the reason you are low in your energy? What are you going to do yourself to be more energized next time? And of course, what can I or we do to help you stay energized during the session? The first question is for me and the group to understand the situation. The second is meant to engage her and give her the feeling of ownership and control of her own learning. And of course, of her part in the learning space, our learning space. The last one refers to me as being the co-owner and co-creator of our learning space. My feeling of ownership and control, understanding how my students learn. Using the checkout board with post-its, the green post-its saying I'm okay, or smileys, happy smiles saying I'm okay, and red ones saying I'm not satisfied, I'm not okay yet, could be tricky in a way that we tend to focus on everything what is not okay yet. So be very careful when you are using the checkout boards, and focus also on everything, on the things that went well, on the green ones, on the happy faces, because they can provide you with ideas and help you develop the learning space that suits them as well. So you engage them as well. It's again our learning space. If you have, for example, a corner, let's say a content corner, with a lot of happy smiles, with a lot of green post-its, while checking out, pick up a few, and start a conversation. The questions there should be like this, something like this. What is the reason you love the content today? What are you going to do yourself to get more of this lovable content next time? And again, of course, what can I and the group do to preserve or even improve this level for the next session? We work together on this. It's a tool that helps us discuss and focus on what matters for the group and individuals for their learning in our learning space. It is our learning space where, in my turn, I'm learning as well. They have engaged me in a different level. When students and I believe that their action can make a difference in our learning space, they become confident, they become engaged and effective learners. Each and every student can develop learner agency, but they need us teachers and the learning space to be able to do so. If I know what my students what drives the learning for my students and how to tune my learning space in the way that I can provide them with what they need, when they need, in the form they prefer, then I have created a much richer learning space. From my experience, a checkout board helps me slow down and reflect, give space and time, learn and engage, improve next session together with the group, and create more effective learning space.
Brilliant. So what you've just listened to is a form in which we develop what we call, from a pedagogical theory point of view, metacognition. It is the ability to know and express what it is that you know, want to know, how you learn. And what you see here, again, demonstrated very nicely, is that the standard lean tools and techniques that you're familiar with, in this case, a performance board, can be tied into pedagogical theory seamlessly. So what you're doing is creating a rich learning space, and whilst doing this, and whilst improving, you're also developing the skill of metacognition, which is one of the paramount skills in the set of 21st century skills. Now, another way in which we actually implement the lean education framework is by having the students co-author the course. What you see in this picture is a lecture with, on the window, the orange post-its. These orange post-its denote the week: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And together with the students, the lecturer defines the topics that will be discussed in that week. Now, it is within the frame of the course, of course, so it's not like everything goes and whatever you feel like will be teaching. But within that framework, there is room and freedom for the students to determine what that week will look like. So for the morning sessions, for the afternoon sessions, we've got a host of topics that will be addressed in that course. And of course, you can feel this coming already. Ticking off the topics as they have happened tells you how we're doing, and it also allows you to change mid-course and introduce other topics depending on the feedback of the students. So this is a way in which you create the white spots in your curriculum. And of course, that goes for your lean trainings exactly the same. Don't pack it up to the hilt, but create white spots in which your trainees and you can together co-design the course. Now, there is a challenge with this. As lecturers, we like to be prepared, like I said, have a full slide deck and have a script that exactly tells me what I will be addressing, when, how, etc., etc. Doing this will challenge the lecturer as well, because there might come up topics that have not been prepared by the lecturer. And that might ultimately require the lecturer to say, hey guys, you want to learn this? But you know what? I don't know either. But that's good because we don't know everything. So we'll go create that content together with the students. But it requires the lecturer to be prepared to do that, to have less structure and have more content available, content of which it not necessarily knows whether it will actually be addressed during that course. So, and that brings us to takeaway number 4. Be overprepared and understructured. Now, this has been all a lot. We've been over the Lean Education Framework. We've introduced the concept of learner agency, put down learning as the primary process of education. We've been over how you can actually use a performance board, some of the core concepts of pedagogy and how they relate to Lean, and how you can use the improvement kata to guide your students' learning. So now sit back, take a breath, and think over what you've heard. And if you've put in your answers on Padlet, relate what you've heard to your questions. And then please write down one insight. Okay, while you finishing your last sentences, there's a couple of questions coming out on the discussion forum. On the questions of the performance board and their order, there is not necessarily a strict order to those. Provide yourself the freedom to experiment and see how that runs. And feel free to just test the water and see how it goes. So given this insight that you've written down now, we'll move on to the next stage, because this, after all, is a workshop. So this session is the participants at work. So bring your insight, the one that you've just written down. Then we'll be, in a few moments, breaking out in sessions of 3 participants. So you will be joined by 2 others. The breakout will last 10 minutes, and you will receive a signal 2 minutes prior to the closing of the breakout session. Discuss your insights, share them, what struck you, how can you apply that, and then take the last 2 minutes to go to Padlet and color your post on the Padlet world map. So if up to now you say, I'm brimming with ideas, color your post with a bright yellow. If you're full of energy and ready to go, make it green. If you say like, Vincent, Lejla, listen, I've got a host of impressions, but I haven't got a clue where to start, paint it blue. And if you say like, whoa, I'm still confused, but at a higher level, paint it pink. For those who haven't checked out at the Padlet yet, check out the email that you received from the conference organizers, or scan the QR code on the screen right now. After 10 minutes, you'll be automatically transferred back So enjoy this engagement with your peers, and we look forward to the colored map of the world. Jose, can you break out everyone? Sorry, come again? Ah,
60 seconds is fine.
then it's going to be 60 seconds.
Give them a little bit more time.
Just hang on, I'll tell you. There's now 7 minutes and 30 seconds gone. So in 90 seconds, 90 seconds, the countdown starts. Or say, hang on, since they only got 1 minute now, and they still need to go to the Padlet, in 8, can you let the sessions continue a bit longer? So do the 60 seconds countdown, but do not transfer them back so that they've got time to do the checkout. Okay, so what we'll then do is we give you a sign, and we'll allow for a bit of extra time in the plenary room. Okay, good. Yes.
And they start.
No, I wasn't. We were talking amongst each other. 60 seconds countdown. Okay. Okay. Very good. Okay.
Okay. Hope you have enjoyed the discussion in your breakout session. As you only have had 1 minute to go to Padlet and to check out with a color of your status right now, we would like to give you just another minute to do so. So use a minute, check in the Padlet, and check out with a color, and let us know how you feel about the discussion and about our presentation up till now. Okay, we see some green ones on the Padlet. We see some confused ones, but on a higher level. Also, people brimming with ideas. That's nice. So what we see is so-called checkout to a large online audience. And this gives us, at a glance, an impression of where you are right now, how the group is doing. And this is just an example. And for the sake of time, we've kept it simple, but we hope that this gives you a clear, that it makes clear how to use the template that we have showed you, how to use it with more extensively with bigger audience and online. So I'm happy to see that some more of you are becoming green and ready to go, full of energy. Great, I love this. This brings us to the fifth takeaway, and that is the insight you just wrote down.
Yes, and that brings us to the final stage of our session today. What we've done with you is we've gone through the preset by asking you two carefully crafted questions, asking you to check in on Padlet. We kind of framed your way going towards this session. We played a little music before we started to get you in a good mood, and then we share with you the 3 goals that we have with this session. Then as we progressed, we did some checkout on how you were doing, to get a feel for are we doing good. We introduced the breakout where you can engage with your peers, and now we are doing the landing. So we are at the 4th arrow in the bow that constitutes the learning space. This is the way we actually design everything that we do. So this is our pencil draft of this session. So each and every bow is designed to make sure that you carefully land. We talked about different ways and techniques of doing so. So we hope that Jean and David recognize some of those new techniques. Liz, Monia, I hope you've learned a few new methods and concepts. For Svenare and Greta, I hope there was a bit of inspiration on how you can move forward with some of those ideas and apply them in your own. Tabitha, we hope that this encouraged you to have the courage to experiment. For us, this was a big experiment just as well. When we decided to use the Padlet world map, we hadn't done so before. And one of you very interestingly connected some of the post-its and asked a question on that, and we answered that. So that is something that we just learned, which is one of the questions. How do we find out these new tools? Is we just have a go and try and open to experiment and let it happen. We're not afraid to fail, because there's no such thing in failure when it comes to learning. Failures provide brilliant opportunities to learn. So we hope that we've shown how this works. And I think our openness to failure is one of the characteristics, and that's a question that Krista asked, of what brings, or what is the shared characteristic of individuals engaging in lean education. And I think that is the intrinsic drive to learn and to improve, but also an eye on the common good and not being afraid to show that you don't know everything. Well, that concludes what we've been doing in this session. There's 5 takeaways that we shared with you. We have a bit of trouble getting in the right mode for the camera. The first takeaway.
Dare to experiment. try out, let things happen and learn from them.
It's lean education is really about learning and about learner agency. There is a close affinity between lean thinking and pedagogy, which makes everything that you guys do and know about lean very useful to those engaged in the primary processes of education, but also for yourselves as you are also trainers and instructors.
Be over-prepared and under-structured. In that way, the students can ask and pull the knowledge at the time they are ready for the knowledge to process.
And the fifth takeaway is the insight that you just wrote down. Now, this ends our session. There will be a Q&A just following on our final closure. But to get you going on your next stage, we have a couple of materials for you. From the description on the conference website, you will be able to download chapter 10 from the book Lean in the Classroom, which contains the description of an actual case of a master course that we taught and some of the techniques and the tools that we applied. Also, you'll find there the performance board template that you can use in your classroom, in your training room. But please feel free to adjust them, to experiment and make them your own. Thank you very much.
And reach out if you have any questions or thoughts.
We would love that.
Vincent, Lejla, that was so amazing. That was absolutely beautifully pitched and laid out, and you took us with you every step of the way. I can see there are a few questions already beginning to come into the chat. Marion Malcolm, if it's not scrolling in front of me, says, question re over-prepared. It's good for the student. Sorry, it keeps moving every time. It's good for the student. But it's scrolling as I. Could you stop typing in for just a second? So the question, there are so many coming in. It's good for the student, but is this not over-processing for the lecturer or tutor?
Yes, it would be over-processing if the lecturer or the teacher knows what the student needs. But there is a huge variety amongst the students, and their needs will differ along the way. So it is in fact not over-processing. It is in fact, if you don't do this, what you will be doing is overproduction. Namely, you provide too much information, too much content in a format and then at a time when the student or the trainee is not ready to take it in. So it might be a little bit of over-processing, but you save the overproduction, and most importantly, you make the most of the individual talents. So if you know from the 8 waste that we identify in Lean, in education, the waste of talent is the biggest.
Now, there's been quite a lot of chat on the discussion forum about this idea of over-prepared and under-structured, and the need to really embrace a mindset of flexibility. So would you say that lies at the heart of what you're suggesting, the way we operate?
Yes, it is. The difference between an experienced teacher or lecturer and an expert lecturer is the ability to move fastly and to understand the thinking that's going on in the minds of our students and trainees, and to switch pace, to switch content as and when needed by the student. So yeah, the growing flexibility is a challenge, but also a fun one, because it requires us lecturers to learn new stuff. But you're absolutely spot on, Ness. That is one of the core implications or aspects of the Lean Education Framework.
And may I just add to being understructured doesn't mean creating chaos. You have your structure. The structure is part of you being prepared, over prepared. But then you can lose the control a little bit and give the space to the learners, playing with the structure, playing with what they are asking and how they are asking it.
Can I ask, how difficult is it to make that mindset change for ordinary human beings?
It is difficult. My experience is that it's completely uncomfortable to do so. And it takes time to change and to feel free to give this space to learners, to students, and not control everything.
Yeah. And it's also that as you do it, you grow the confidence that it's actually working out very well. In effect, it is creating more energy, more fun, and more engagement by the students. And you will find that after a while, it actually decreases your own workload because more of the learning process is actually owned by the students who take a more active role in participating in producing and constructing that learning space. So at the beginning, it's a bit uncomfortable.
And hard work.
But have faith in yourselves as experts, and don't be afraid not to know, because that's part of the learning. And perhaps that's another fundamental insight. In the learning space, everyone learns. As we run this session, Lejla and I learn a lot. We hope you learn a lot, but it was not like we are the sages on the stage and we'll tell you how to do that. As we progress, all of us are learning.
Well, Lejla, Vincent, you could not have ended on a more optimistic and positive note, and also one, thank you, that sets up my keynote very nicely indeed. But I would like to express all of our thanks. If you've been reading the discussion forum as we've been going through, you'll see all the amazing comments. And I would just like to say on behalf of everyone here, thank you so much, not only for what you said, but the way you modeled your learning points in how you said it. So thank you so much for that fascinating and utterly inspiring presentation and workshop. That was really, really enjoyable. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. Lejla, Vincent, do read the comments before you head off.
We will.
We do. It was a great pleasure being with you guys.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please can you all thank Lejla and Vincent in the normal way by putting your comments in the discussion forum. And now, as I move my millions of notes from that workshop out the way, it is time for me to take the floor, by agreement, I assure you, and deliver the first of my 3 keynotes. And this one is entitled, which is very fitting given what's just come before us, It's Not All About You. Now, the irony of doing a keynote on dynamic communication and the role of the other side in knowledge sharing that we've just been hearing so much about, doing that in the form of a rather restrictive webcast is not lost on me today. But I want to share with you some of my own learning from 30 years of working in TV and radio as a presenter, reporter, interviewer, and also as a host, event host or speaker at conferences like this. So we can all reflect on how to be better communicators, something I would argue we all need in these challenging times. And even though I'm meant to be a professional, as Vincent and Lejla have just said, we're all learning all the time. And my learning point for this is really summed up in the following phrase: it's not all about you. And by that I mean it's not about you or me as the presenter and speaker in front of an audience. Now, some of you might be thinking that if you're giving a talk or presentation, a pitch, or even a job interview, it is about you because you're the one in the hot seat, you're the one on the stage in the virtual limelight with all that knowledge, wisdom, and experience in your head. And let's face it, what certainly is down to you is all the hard work and responsibility of planning, preparing, getting your message across, getting the business of the day done. So let's just unpack that phrase a little bit more. The main point I'll be sharing with you is that it's time we all changed our frame of reference to be less egocentric and really think about the fact that sharing knowledge effectively and really meaningfully sharing it requires there to be more than just one of us in that relationship. You can't be a leader if no one wants to follow you. But if you get it right, the benefits for you and for your audience are enormous in terms of improved working, more efficiency, better and more trusting relationships, and frankly, greater happiness and satisfaction in getting a job well done. Now, to my mind, sharing knowledge or experience boils down to three really simple questions. Who's it for? That is, who is the audience? What do they need to know? That's your content. And importantly, why should they care? How can I make it meaningful to you, the audience? So let's focus on each of those questions in turn, starting with who our audience is. Imagine the scenario. A client or a manager asks you to give a talk, a presentation, or whatever, about your job, your current project, your area of expertise, whatever you're working on. What's your first thought? Can you pop that first thought into the discussion box now? And we'll see if it resonates with other people. I'm going to run through some that I came up with. Is it, how exciting! I can't wait to share all my knowledge and insights with other people. Is it, I can't wait to be up there like a mighty colossus, looking amazing and powerful. Just think of the personal branding opportunity. Or is it, oh no, I have to stand up in front of a bunch of people and sound like I know what I'm talking about? Or maybe, good grief, how am I going to find the time to write a speech? It'll end up with me staying up all night. Or maybe, is it even, how can I politely say no without seeming rude, scared, or ungrateful? Okay, so let's have a little look. How can I add most value to others? What do they need to know and why? Lovely. I can't wait to get them excited about lean. Okay, some very good positive starts there. So we are going to assume from the comments that are coming into the discussion box that you're not wanting or able to wriggle out of it. I'm guessing your next question is going to be this. Okay, so what am I going to say? And this is the point when you find yourself having that thought, when I want you to stop, think, and reframe. How many of us start thinking about a lecture, a pitch, a presentation with a blank document in front of them, or a blank mind, or that plaintive cry of, what am I going to say? I bet most of us at the conference have experienced this at some point, especially as that talk deadline approaches. So here's the life hack I'm offering you today. To make preparing a talk swift and effective, I want you to shift that arrow from over your head to over that of the audience. Because it's not about you. You know your job, you know your projects that you're working on and why you're doing what you're doing, or at least I hope you do. After all, you should be the expert on your own life. But if you bombard people with a download of your entire brain, it'll take you forever to write it, the audience will get overwhelmed, and the audience won't be able to pick out the most relevant points for them, the parts that really have meaning for them. So instead, to make shifting your knowledge easier and more efficient, I want you to shift that arrow to think about the other people in the relationship, the audience, and focus on them. So who is it you're speaking to? Really get to know your audience and their environment. In other words, we're back to that lean concept of respect for people. So your questions could be, who are they? What are they like? What do they already know about my topic? What's their working culture? Is it similar to mine or is it different? And what does that mean in practice when I'm communicating? And importantly, when am I speaking to them? The more you get to know them, the audience, the clearer, more focused and easier your job gets, the more effective your job gets, the more it delivers real value. And it's not just about the audience as people. Think also about their environment, what they're dealing with. Now, if I'm broadcasting a documentary, say at 9 o'clock at night, I can pretty much guarantee that most of my audience will have a good level of attention. I can deliver a high level of information and be fairly confident that they'll retain at least a goodly portion of it. But it's not always that easy. When I started out in TV, one of my very first presenting jobs was presenting the weather. I had 2, maybe 3 minutes of a slot every night at the end of the evening news. And in that time, I had to get across some sometimes pretty important information. Storm warnings, heavy rain, thunder and lightning. We are talking Scotland after all. I asked for some feedback from the BBC Research Unit on how my nightly forecast landed with the audience, what impact it had on their learning. And the results came back. They were quite shocking. They were saying that in a 3-minute broadcast, the audience only really actively listened to about 30 seconds and remembered even less. Now that seemed to me a huge waste of time, both for me, who was doing all the work, and the viewers. So I took a really hard look at who my audience was. And they were a diverse group, generally from their mid-30s to late 60s, early 70s, and also what they were doing at the same time. That was around 6:30 at night. And of course, they were cooking supper, dealing with kids, getting in from work, catching up with family. In other words, they tended to be juggling multiple activities with the TV on in the background. So although this audience was exactly the same audience that later that night, when they were relaxed on the sofa, the same audience that might sit down and watch a serious factual documentary at 6:30 at night, they simply didn't have the bandwidth to process information that wasn't short, simple, and to the point. Which brings up my next point. Once you understand who the people are in the audience, the next point is not what do I want to say to them, but what do they need to know. And as Ruth Archer was explaining yesterday, we're talking about need to knows, not nice to knows. So going back to my weather presenter days, what my audience needed was to have key information to help them successfully plan their day, such as, do they need to take an umbrella to work? Will the roads be icy or dangerous? Can they have a barbecue in the garden tomorrow? Can they go up into the mountains without being caught in a blizzard? Now, this stuff matters. And trust me, in Scotland, as with where all of you live, the weather can be a matter of life and death. So I told them exactly what they needed and no more. Instead of spouting on and on about occluded or warm fronts sweeping across the country, I told them, take your umbrella tomorrow, it's going to rain. At 6:30, when trying to get a reluctant child to eat their vegetables, they didn't need to know that the weather that they were getting was the remnants of a storm that had just devastated the east coast of America a few days beforehand, even though I found that quite interesting, and they probably would find that interesting too at 9 p.m. when they're sitting relaxed on the sofa with the kids in bed. What they needed to know was that although it might seem okay now outside, there were storm force winds due overnight. In other words, I tailored my content to what they needed to know, not what I thought might be interesting to tell them. And I shifted the arrow from my head to theirs and became a better, more effective communicator as a result. But it's one thing to identify what someone needs to know. The real job is to make them care about what you're telling them. This is how we absorb and really retain information. And here's another life lesson in sharing knowledge that it took me way too long to realize. You can't force people to learn, to open up their minds, to see the world from a different point of view. You have to connect with them emotionally and make them want to do that. So how do you make your audience care? Well, back in my first job as a weather presenter, I'd wrestled with this question of how to make people listening and care about what I was saying. Instead of standing there and giving a faceless audience a download of weather data for Scotland, I started to see my audience as human beings, juggling multiple times at a stressful time of night. Now, to catch their attention and communicate what they needed to know, I needed to break through the noise of their lives. And one way to do this was to entertain them as well as inform, so that they paused in what they were doing, that they took notice, and maybe I could even make them smile. As an experiment, I started to use many of the very same weather expressions we heard last night during the quiz. So, dreich for grey and miserable, druchit for damp. And BBC feedback showed, excuse me, this went down really well. So, just a little bit like we were hearing, I started actively having fun and playing with my audience, using humour and other dramatic techniques such as alliteration, repeating the same sound for effect. So instead of saying something like, tomorrow the East Coast will get a mixture of low cloud and drizzle, I started saying things like, tomorrow it'll be Dreich and Druchit from Dundee to Drumnadrochit. Now, trust me, that does make sense if you live in Scotland. And it sure captured the audience's attention. So much so that within a few months, I was getting the highest audience appreciation indexes in the newsroom. The audience was listening more, learning more, and remembering more. And I learned that important lesson that it's not about me, the speaker. It's about you, the audience, who you are, what you're doing or juggling, how much attention you're realistically able to give me, and what you really need. In other words, I'd learned to shift that arrow off my head and over that of my audience's head. I'd started to see them not as passive recipients of learned advice. Frankly, they didn't care I had a first-class degree in geography and meteorology and could spout on about climate change and its global consequences. No, I was finally seeing them as human beings, struggling at a really difficult time in the evening when they were already exhausted but had important things to do, like feeding themselves, feeding the kids, or bedtimes. They also needed to plan their tomorrows, and for that, they needed to know what the weather was going to do. And from that moment on, I always worked really hard on my script. They'd be entertaining, witty, ironic, cleverly constructed. But that's one thing, delivering the weather forecast and convincing folk to watch some often challenging or complex information on big issues of the day, like homelessness, inflation, or addiction. And here we have to scroll forward about 10 years in my career, by which time I'd worked all over the world as a correspondent for the UK's biggest current affairs show, Tonight with Trevor McDonald, based on the US show 60 Minutes. I'd been headhunted from our very small channel, Channel 5, where I'd been anchoring my own current affairs show and was used to calling the shots. Now, as a geographer to trade, I was passionate about climate change, unequal trade, disease, poverty, all the big issues. And now I finally had a primetime audience of millions to share my knowledge with. Yay! Trouble was, when I was pitching ideas for that week's stories at our frankly terrifying Monday morning meetings, I'd be met with folded arms and a frankliness that leaves me underwhelmed. Underwhelmed? It's like, how can climate catastrophe leave anyone underwhelmed? Or if I was off overseas working and had to send in my ideas, I'd get them back with a line struck through them saying WGAS or SFW, which, for those of you lucky enough to have escaped Monday morning meetings in the newsroom, is another way of saying, who gives a, I'll leave you to fill in the blanks, or so what, with an added F word in the middle. It was incredibly brutal, but it taught me a really hard lesson. It's really, really difficult to make people care about issues. It's much easier to make them care about real human stories, stories we can relate to. In my case, ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. Ordinary people like us, but in extraordinary circumstances. So that could be us. And suddenly it's relatable. Suddenly the audience cares. Communication is not about facts. It's about the impact of those facts on our lives. How does that information affect us or those around us? How will it make a difference to our lives? What benefits or troubles will it bring? And we're back to seeing humans in our audience, that respect for people, ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. So next time you're delivering the findings from your research or information about a new project or initiative, if you really want to connect with your audience, to share with them information or insights, ask yourself, why should my audience care? And if you can answer that, then you've nailed it. So who's my audience? What do they need to know? Why should they care? If you structure your preparation according to these simple ideas, then your talk, your pitch, your sharing of knowledge will be efficient, much more efficient to organize for you, but it will also be targeted, meaningful, and welcomed by the recipients. They might not agree with you, but at least they'll have had reason to reflect on what you've said, meaning that your time has never been wasted. Remember that we give a presentation sharing our knowledge. It's a gift. And in the same way, you hopefully wouldn't wrap up a smelly old pair of socks in some random plastic bag and give it to a loved one for their birthday present. That gift should be chosen meaningfully, holding the recipient's needs and wants in mind as an act of caring, an act of giving of yourself, your time, your energy, your respect, even I would argue an act of love. It's not about you, it's about them. But before you tell them, you have to understand them. And in that way, as we've been hearing, we both grow in knowledge together. I'd like to leave you now with my very final point about sharing knowledge, a kind of why should you care about everything I'm sharing with you now? Well, in today's download society, it's very easy to give our knowledge and time to those who shout the loudest, pay the most, demand the most. Likewise, it tends to be those with the loudest voices who get their voices heard. And this means that those quiet, forgotten people who might really benefit from sharing our knowledge and resources, they can get left behind. And we risk talking in echo chambers with people who just groupthink. Both those scenarios do us harm. We've seen the effects of groupthink in the economic crisis of 2007 and 8, even our response to the current global pandemic. If we really want our knowledge to make a difference, maybe it's time to listen to more diverse voices, people from other groups, other places, other experiences. It's well documented that diverse voices make smarter decisions, even smarter than top graduates from our top universities and businesses, or any largely homogeneous group. Diverse voices also result in more innovations, making fewer mistakes, and giving greater scrutiny of current policies and practices. So I'll leave you now with my ask. If you really want your knowledge to make a difference, to drive meaningful, continuous improvement, be brave enough to stop listening, to stop talking, and listen to the quiet voices. Maybe even listen to the silences. Spot those telling gaps in the conversation and see those who are there in the shadows with their mouths, for whatever reason, held tightly shut. Sometimes sharing knowledge isn't about talking at all. Thank you. Well, thanks so much for your attention, and that brings us to another end of part 1. Don't forget that during the break, you can go into the meeting hub and connect with other people. You can visit the Wellbeing Hub to give yourself some care and attention. But please be ready 5 minutes before the start of the next session, in about 2 hours' time for another series of workshops. Enjoy your break, and I look forward to seeing you back 5 minutes before the next session in just under 2 hours' time. Bye for now.